Welcome back everyone to the weekly mailbox, your chance to ask me questions about absolutely anything you would like. Formula 1, Formula E, motor racing, anything in between. And as always, I have chosen 5 questions from you, the viewers at home, whether that's from the YouTube comments, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. But today we're starting with question 1, which comes from Siggy Brick 1999, who asks, if Brawn didn't get bought out by Mercedes at the end of 2009, do you believe that they would have had more success or would have ended up in the midfield? Thank you for your question, dude. And I wanted to start today's episode here because yesterday, if you didn't catch it, you can do after this video, but watch this one first, of course. Yesterday, we did our second F1 Legends video, and we focused on Jenson Button. And whilst 2009 was only one season, it obviously was the most influential season of his career with Brawn GP. And whilst I was doing a bit of research for that video, and I think there's been a bit of a trend at the moment on YouTube and the Formula 1 side of things, obviously because of what's going on. But that trend is looking back in the history of Formula 1. And it was the F1 Word who did a video looking at the point system if, I think it was the first 7 races in 2009 weren't taken into account. And when I did my own research, I didn't quite realise not only what a brilliant start Brawn had, but I didn't realise how much it just dipped off at the end of the season. Button didn't win after those first 7 races, which, I mean, I was only 9 at the time, 9 or 10 years old in 2009, but I just remember it being so dominant for Brawn, but actually that wasn't quite the story. And as the season progressed, McLaren got better, well, they actually got a semi-decent car, and Sebastian Vettel in the Red Bull got a lot better. And I think Barrichello won 2 races after those first 7, but after other teams put the double diffuser into their car, Brawn weren't so high and mighty and out of reach of the other teams. So when I first looked at this question, I thought, well, if the trend continued into the following season, into 2010, and Brawn's pace differential was closing like it did by the end of 2009, I don't think they'd have won the title in 2010. And I don't know, obviously, we'll never know the backdoor deals and little small print is the word I'm looking for, between Mercedes and Brawn, and we don't know how far along that Mercedes car was being built, whether that was from Brawn's side of things, which I doubt it was, because the team were obviously Honda when Brawn bought them, and I don't think there was a plan long term, and I think that's why Mercedes took a few years, first of all, starting off with that okay 2010 car. 2012 started winning races with Rosberg, and obviously 2014 is when it all exploded into the gigantic team they are now. So I think if Brawn stayed, I think in 2010 they may have won a single race, a couple of races maybe, but I don't think they would have become this gigantosaurus Rex that Mercedes have turned into in the hybrid era. I mean, it's interesting to think because Brawn did have Mercedes engines at the end of in 2009. So that obviously would have been a factor going into the hybrid era. I think they had a strong driver lineup in Button and Barrichello. They probably would have kept that for a few more seasons. But do I think they'd have been title favourites for 2010? No, I really don't. Ferrari got their act together a little bit more. McLaren certainly got their act together more. Red Bull were better than ever. And I don't think they would have been able to compete with that. I think maybe they would have snuck back, maybe with the Renaults of Kubica and Petrov. Maybe that would have been their closest challenger. So yeah, I guess, Siggy, I would say they would have dropped back into the midfield. But what I do know is that later on today at 5 o'clock, the F1 Debate Show are doing a full, I believe, it will be between half an hour and an hour is usually their videos. Might be a bit shorter. I'm not too sure, I probably should have asked. But they're doing a feature video about this topic itself and whether Brawn were not bought out by Mercedes at all. So if you want to know a little bit more about that question in a bit more detail, and if you want to support them or check out their channel for the first time, I would highly recommend it. Great guys, lovely guys. And I just wanted to put that in at the end of question 1. But thank you for your question. And yeah, and I probably just want to add on to the end of that question before we move on to question 2. I quite like the fact that Brawn didn't stay for 2 seasons. they were such an underdog. I mean, it's one of the best underdog stories in sport in general. I mean, football has Leicester City in, was that 2017? My football knowledge is okay, but not the best. But Formula One has Brawn. And I think that special one season where they were on the brink of collapse, they showed up and did so well and just clinched it at the end of the season. Button, who'd struggled to find a real home in Formula One. Barrichello, who was discarded by Ferrari, rightly so, he was coming to the end of his career, but for the chance to give Barrichello a couple more victories on his CV, for Button to finally get that title, I think if they stayed a couple more seasons, that probably would have tainted that story a little bit. But still, I think for F1 2020, the career mode for the game, I think I'm going to do Brawn as my manager career mode team. You probably didn't need to know that. So we'll move on to question 2. But yeah, I enjoyed that one, and I really always enjoy looking more into Brawn. Question number 2 comes from It's Milver, who asks, do you think there will ever be an opportunity for a woman to join Formula One anytime soon, seeing it's one of the few sports that both men and women can take part in? And I had to sit down and think about this one a little bit, because there's no denying the majority of drivers in this sport are men. I mean, we've never had an official Formula One woman race in an official race. We've had a couple do practice sessions, be reserve and third drivers. We had Susie Wolff for Williams for those several seasons at that was the mid-2010s. I think Susie Wolff was at Williams. We had Carmen Jorda at Lotus. Tatiana Calderon has been at Alfa Romeo for the last couple of seasons, but there's never quite been that opportunity for them to actually fill a race seat, which is more what this question is focused around. And whilst the W Series has got a lot of criticism, I think its intent is in the right place. The only big criticism I have with the W Series is that I think the prize should be a drive in Formula 2. I think Chadwick, who won the championship, I feel she should be in Formula 2 this year, because I think it'd be unfair for anyone who drives in Formula 2. I mean, Calderon didn't do W Series, she drove in Formula 2, and I think it'd be unfair to jump straight from W Series, which at the moment, the car standard is on level with Formula 3. I don't see why they can't get a chance in Formula 2. That should be the natural stepping stone into Formula 1, and until they fix that, I think sadly it could be a bit of time until we see a woman in Formula 1. But saying that, Formula 3 this year, we've got Sophia Flores. That's how I pronounce it. I think I'm a little bit off there. But she's been very impressive in several of her seasons. She had a big crash in Macau a couple of years ago, but is doing her best to not forget that. But I think she's put out several social media posts saying she doesn't want to be known for that. She wants to be known as one of the greatest women racing drivers of all time. And so I'm looking at her career with a lot of interest, and she's avoiding W Series at the moment. I think, like I say, because they're not giving the opportunity for Formula 2 at the moment, and she probably feels she can better put herself on the market, perhaps, if she races in Formula 3 and jump up that way. But it's an interesting one. I think we still have a few years to go. There's no one who's right on the brink, if that quite makes sense. I mean, Flores is in Formula 3. If she can win a couple of races, have a strong season. Chadwick won a couple of races in Formula 3 Asia, so if she can get an opportunity as well, maybe we only have to wait a couple of seasons. But what I would really hate to see is someone be pushed in too early and then their reputation be scarred. And a little bit like Calderon, I think she was pushed into Formula 2 a little bit too quick, and she was more often than not at the back of the field. And I would hate to see someone jump into Formula 1 too early. I hope that makes sense. So we'll move on to question number 3, which comes from W. Cooley, who asks, what do you think about Formula 1 posting full race replays on YouTube the past few weeks? And what race would you love to see in the future? P.S. Have you been keeping up with the final season of Clone Wars? And a quick note on that, of course I have. It's so good, especially the Mandalore arc. I'll leave that there. Back to Formula 1. I think it's brilliant. Formula 1 are doing these, I don't quite know what they call them. Is it Race Rewind? That's what I've been talking about it as, but I don't think that's the official title. Anyway, Race Rewind I think's brilliant. I think they should have been doing this for such a long time, and I suppose there is a slight conflict of interest because they're trying to sell F1 TV subscriptions, and I suppose, depending on where you're viewing Mailbox this week in the world. Some of you in Europe, I believe, have to watch Formula 1 through F1 TV. You don't have any other choice. I know here in the UK, we can't watch live F1 through F1 TV, but we can watch their archive of races. And if Formula 1 continue to each week post 1 or 2 races on YouTube, that's going to put people off buying subscriptions for F1 TV. So from a business standpoint, it's contradictory, and I'm not too sure once we get racing again, they will actually do it. However, from a personal and selfish standpoint, I think it's great. I bought F1 TV for the first year, didn't really use it, so I haven't done it this season. But it doesn't matter because they're putting up the races anyway. However, I think it's the least they can do. There's no live races at the moment, and yes, we've got the virtual GPs, which that's a bit of take it or leave it, I think, for most people. Some people love it. Some people are in the middle, some people just aren't interested. So I think these race reruns, or rewinds, I think it's a nice way of... I mean, I've got plenty of friends that have watched Formula 1 in the last couple of years. And last Mailbox, when we spoke about Drive to Survive, plenty of you told me that's how you got into Formula 1. So I think it's awesome that Formula 1 are showing off some of their best races of all time. And for you guys as well, it gives you the opportunity to understand what I'm nattering on about sometimes if you haven't seen these events. And we spoke last week, I think it was, about underrated drivers and what recency bias, that's the one. And I think some of these races just give people slightly different perspectives. From a Grosjean standpoint, I think this weekend we're going back to 2012. That's totally fine with me. He had a great season in the latter half of 2012. But I think overall, it's awesome. And if there's anyone I'd like to see in the future, races they've not done yet, how they've not done Canada 2011, I don't know. That should have been number 1 on my list that I would want to see. What other races? I mean, Spa 2015, I think, is a cracking race, but that I am biased because Grosjean scored a podium and it's the first race I attended live. But I still think that's a criminally underrated Grand Prix. And maybe Maldonado in 2012, his win. I can't quite remember what happened in the rest of that Grand Prix. And it might have been a bit of a stinker. But even just seeing that, I think would be some cool ones. So I'd love to know some of your thoughts in the comments below for races you would want to see. As we move on to question 4, which comes from Kirill. And this is just a bit of fun. And this one I would really like to know your thoughts in the comments below. Because audience participation this week is very much out of the box, and I've included it anyway, but if you don't really like the audience participation, you can use this one. I'll get on with the question now. Who would the top teams choose as a replacement if one of their drivers decided to do a shock retirement like Rosberg? And I'm just going to quickly go over Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull, and we'll start off with Mercedes. So if Lewis Hamilton retired and did a Rosberg, which I don't think he would, but if he did, who would be the replacement? I think the obvious one is George Russell. And this is certain, especially Mercedes, is one I want to look at in a transfer talk in a couple of weeks' time. But I think Russell is, for me anyway, I mean, Ocon's still under management from Toto Wolff. Not Mercedes, but Toto Wolff. So there's still a bit of a link there. But I think Russell is the most obvious option. However, there's definitely a risk element there. You know, Bottas may have to be number 1 for a little while. I think Russell would have the edge, but is Bottas ready to make that jump if he's needed to? I'm not too sure. So maybe the team would consider moving on Bottas as well, potentially. Maybe trying to bring a Verstappen over or Ricciardo over. Would be interesting, but I certainly think my pick for now, again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, my pick for now would be George Russell. Ferrari, we'll go with if Vettel retires. And again, we did a full episode about this on Transfer Talk last week. So if you want to know more about this particular question, you can do so. I went for in that video, if Vettel retires, I would go with Bottas or Hülkenberg, is what I would say. Mainly because I think Ferrari work best with a number 1 and a number 2 dynamic. And I think Bottas suits that role perfectly. I think he would be pretty much what Kimi Räikkönen was to Vettel for those several years, but I think I think he'd be a little bit closer to Leclerc. I mean, Bottas is a bit younger than what Raikkonen was when he was at Ferrari at his second stint. And Bottas, on his day, on a track he loves, can be straight on the pace and would challenge Leclerc a little bit. Has that experience. Hülkenberg is a cheap option. It's a bit of a risk, but it's one who comes with pretty much no baggage. You know what you're going to get, and he's, I don't want to say an expendable driver, but if the likes of a Giovinazzi, a Schwartzman, a Schumacher's coming through the ranks at Alfa Romeo, Hülkenberg's a bit easier to move on, if that makes sense. But certainly a Ricciardo would be one that people want me to say, and I can't deny he'd be a great fit for Ferrari, I believe, especially alongside Leclerc. And for Red Bull, if Verstappen left, blimey, I think they'd be in a pickle. Because I think I've said this many times, I don't think we've seen enough of Albon to really cement my opinions on him yet, because there's potential there, but over that second half of the year, he was still learning the car. There was lots of issues with gearboxes, starting at the back of the field, working his way through. So from what he was given, he did a great job, but in a straight fight with Max Verstappen, we've yet to really see that, and I think Verstappen's certainly got the edge at the moment. Is Albon ready to be that number one? I don't think so. He's only going into his second year of Formula 1. Gasly, well, he's got a podium with Toro Rosso now. That's very impressive. Is he ready to jump back in that car? Questionable. And Danny Kvyat, are the team going to allow him to come back? And is he ready to really lead a team himself? Especially at the front, I'm not too sure. So the Red Bull one is the biggest question mark for me. And I think if Verstappen did leave, they'd have to take someone from outside the family. Maybe look at bringing back a Ricciardo. Maybe trying to steal a Lando Norris. Bring back Carlos Sainz, potentially. I think that's a good shout. I don't know. I'm a bit stuck on that one, but I'll say Carlos Sainz. Yeah, I was kind of just throwing ideas around there, but I think if Verstappen leaves, they will try their best to bring back Carlos Sainz. That makes sense in my head. I still think they made the wrong decision letting him go. But as we move on to the final question, our audience participation question, Mark 2, is what we'll call it, because I'm using this to also talk about some of our live streams as well. You'll see what I mean. So, DeMarco Gale asks, what hobbies have you got into since the start of the lockdown period? And I would be interested to know what some of you guys have been doing in the comment section below. But for me, not really a lot has changed. To be totally honest, I'm still pretty much doing videos, and we're finally back into a normal schedule now, 3 a week. Mailbox has moved to a Friday, and we've got our 2 live streams, which again, I want to talk about in a moment. But if you're not interested in that, fair play. So I've been doing that, but for the most part, I've got uni work to do. I've got exams at the beginning of May in a couple of weeks' time, so my focus is on that. So not really a lot has changed for me, but there's certainly hobbies I've been looking at and trying to start, and streaming's the big one for me. But if you've got any unique ones, again, I'd actually be really interested to hear from you in the comments. But just before we go, I promised people last week and over on Twitch that I would have a little chat about the open lobbies, because this is what I've properly started since the lockdown, is Twitch. I've never used Twitch in my life. I'm still getting used to it. I feel we're almost there. The audio's still a little bit off, a little bit echoey for my liking. But I know why that is. I can't really help that until I actually get a proper setup, which I don't want to do at the moment because of lockdown. And I think that's a bit unfair on other people, couriers and whatever. But the stream itself has been so much fun. I've absolutely loved it, and I'm gutted I didn't start it sooner. And our open lobby streams, which I've had a lot of questions from you guys asking, how do you join? Is it free? As long as you've got an Xbox, which I know most of you don't, and apologies, that's all I've got, so that's the only thing I can do it on at the moment. As long as you've got the Xbox, F1 2019, Xbox Live, you can join. My gamer tag is F1E Reviews. Very simple, no spaces, capital F1E and R. Very straightforward. And as long as you get there on time, which the open lobbies open at 10 to 8 on a Tuesday and Saturday, so we've got one tomorrow. As long as you get there on time, first come, first serve, happy days. You can get in 10 races, lovely. Now, I'm thinking about doing 3 a week, or doing Saturday as our championship like we have it now, Tuesday as a testing championship where we're going to do a few different rules. So at the moment we have 10 races, 5 laps, random grid. On a Tuesday, one week we might do reverse grid. One week we might do one-shot quali. One week we might do 5 races at 25%. So I'm thinking about changing the Tuesday format, but the Saturday format will be the same. And again, I'm playing with the idea of bringing in something on a Thursday. Whether that's a league, whether that's a little bit something like Tuesday, more of a testing bed, more of a mess around kind of thing, a Formula 2 evening perhaps, multiplayer car evening, I'm not quite too sure yet. But I wanted to keep you in the loop that tomorrow is our next championship. Humonic going to try and make sure he retains his title for a second evening. Twiggy going to try and get it back, and I'm going to try and claim my first. So if you're interested in joining, I'll put up things all through tomorrow, letting you know when it is, where it is. It's on Twitch. It's very straightforward. And I'll leave that there. Thank you all for watching this week's episode of the Weekly Mailbox. I hope you're all keeping safe. I hope you're all keeping well. And if you've got any questions for next week's episode, you know the drill by now. Twitter, Instagram, comments down below, community page. You're all awesome. Thank you all very much for watching. Subscribe if you are new. And if you've made it this far, fair play. Thank you, and hit it with a like if you enjoyed, I guess. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.